After a landslide destroys her village, Hana guides a group of orphaned children to plant apricot trees over the graves of the lost. Through grief, storms, and rebirth, they learn that love and memory endure like the blossoms that always return.
The morning air hung heavy with a silence that spoke louder than any voice. I stood at the edge of the landslide's scared earth, the ground beneath my feet trembling faintly with memories I could not shake. The village I once knew had been torn apart in a single, devastating moment. The earth had swallowed homes, lives, and a future I had envisioned with my husband. Now, only the jagged remains of broken walls and twisted trees remained, a graveyard of memories beneath a sky that seemed too vast and indifferent. I am Hana, but today I am more a guardian of sorrow, a bearer of fragile hope. My delicate frame seemed at odds with the weight I carried, yet within me, a quiet strength stirred. The landslide had taken my husband, my parents, and so many others, but it had not taken the breath of life that still whispered through the restless wind. As dawn painted the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, I traced the outlines of fallen homes with my eyes, imagining the laughter and warmth that once lived there. The distant melody of birdsong rose, like a fragile thread weaving through the heavy silence, a reminder that life persisted even after loss. From the corner of the village, the hesitant footsteps of children approached, 4 of them, their small figures silhouetted against the rising sun. Taro, with his slender frame and dark, searching eyes. Kiko, her sharp gaze and defiant stance belying the storm within. Sora, the youngest, whose curiosity flickered behind tear-streaked cheeks, and another child, silent but present, a shadow of grief in their own right. They were the orphans, the ones left behind by the landslide's cruel hand, and now they were mine to guide. I greeted them with a soft smile, my voice barely more than a whisper. Today, we begin a new journey, together. Their eyes flickered with uncertainty and something fragile, hope, perhaps, or the longing for it. We gathered beneath the lone cherry tree that had somehow withstood the disaster, its branches bare yet reaching toward the sky as if in silent prayer. I brought with me saplings of apricot trees, delicate, resilient, and bursting with the promise of renewal. I explained how these trees would grow over the graves of our lost loved ones, their blossoms a living memory of those we held dear. Taro lowered his gaze, clutching a small notebook where he had been sketching apricot blossoms since the day I taught him about their significance. Kiko's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a stubborn line, but she did not turn away. Sora's small hands trembled as he reached for a sapling, his innocence unbroken despite the shadow of grief. Together, we knelt in the soft earth, the scent of spring rain mingling with the rich aroma of the soil. The children's hands, dirtied and trembling, dug small holes beside freshly marked graves, each one a sacred promise to remember and to heal. I watched closely, occasionally brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, my fingers lingering on the rough bark of a young apricot sapling as I whispered to it, "Grow strong, and carry our memories with you." The earth, once torn and broken, welcomed the saplings as if recognizing the need for life to rise again. A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying the faint scent of apricot blossoms yet to come. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of memory and the fragile pulse of new beginnings intertwine beneath the vast, watchful sky. In that moment, beneath the quiet resilience of the village and the tender care of new life, I dared to believe that healing could begin, that even in loss, there was the possibility of rebirth, and that the song of the falling apricots would one day fill the air with a melody of hope. But the path ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of grief lingered still. How would these children, and I, find the strength to nurture not only the trees but also our wounded hearts? The answer lay hidden in the seasons yet to come, in the silent growth beneath the earth, and in the quiet courage that stirs when we dare to hope. The morning air was cool and still as I gathered the children beneath the pale light of the waking sky. The orchard spread before us like a tender promise, the earth freshly turned, waiting to embrace the fragile apricot saplings we were about to plant. I knelt by a small hole, the soil soft and dark beneath my fingertips, and invited the children closer. "See how the roots spread gently," I said, lifting a young sapling with care. "We must place it softly into the earth so it can grow strong." Their eyes were wide, some curious, others hesitant. I could feel their grief like an invisible weight pressing down, yet here, in this quiet act, there was a chance to sow something new. Taro lingered on the edge, his slender figure hunched slightly, clutching a worn sketchbook. He didn't join the others at the hole but watched from afar, his dark eyes tracing the distant hills. I knew his silence well, a refuge from the pain that clung to him like a shadow. "Would you like to try planting one?" I asked gently, but he only shook his head, the corners of his mouth tight. Still, I saw him glance at the apricot blossoms fluttering in the breeze, a silent conversation between boy and tree. Kiko, on the other hand, stood with arms crossed and eyes sharp, as the thorny branches of the bushes nearby. Her defiance was fierce, a shield against the ache of loss. "Why plant trees for those who are gone?" she asked, voice trembling but resolute. "They won't come back no matter what we do." I met her gaze steadily, knowing the fear behind her words. "These trees are not for bringing them back," I said softly. "They are for remembering, for holding the past gently in our hearts while we learn to live again." She scoffed but didn't argue further, the tension lingering like a storm cloud. As the sun climbed higher, the children moved between moments of stillness and bursts of activity. Sora, with his boundless curiosity, dug eagerly, scattering bits of earth but laughing all the while. Micah arrived quietly, carrying a pot of herbal tea, its steam rising like a fragrant mist. She handed cups to the children, the warm liquid comforting them in ways words could not. "This will soothe the tired heart," she said with a smile, her eyes crinkling kindly. Yuki followed shortly after, his broad shoulders steady and reassuring. In his hands were wooden stakes, carefully carved to support the delicate saplings against wind and rain. "The trees need strong roots and steady hands," he said, setting the stakes with precise care. The children watched, some helping, others simply observing the rhythm of rebuilding, of growth and protection. Throughout the day, I spoke to the children of impermanence, how life changed like the seasons, how loss and renewal were intertwined. "Just as these trees will bloom and then shed their blossoms, so too do our hearts open and close," I said. "There is beauty even in letting go." Some listened with quiet understanding, others with skepticism, but all were touched by the fragile hope that stirred beneath the sorrow. Taro finally approached me as the afternoon shadows lengthened. His sketchbook now open to a delicate drawing of an apricot branch, blossoms unfolding in ink and charcoal. "I want to draw them," he whispered, "so I can remember." I nodded, warmth filling my chest, "and by remembering, we keep them alive." Kiko lingered nearby, her eyes softer now, though still guarded. I sensed a battle within her, a desire to hold on, and the faintest flicker of possibility in the new life we nurtured together. The village around us remained quiet, still bearing the scars of the landslide, but the small circle of children and I had begun to plant roots not just in the earth, but in each other's fragile hearts. As the day drew to a close, I paused to touch the rough bark of a newly planted sapling. It was slender and unsteady, yet alive much like us all. The wind stirred the apricot blossoms overhead, petals fluttering like whispered promises. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of hope took hold, fragile but persistent. "Tomorrow," I thought, "we will tend to these roots again, and maybe, just maybe, they will grow strong enough to carry us through the days ahead." But as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village, I could not help but wonder, how many storms would it take before these roots held fast? The earth beneath our feet was soft and new, yet the weight of the past pressed silently, a reminder that healing was not a path without struggle. Still, with each small step, each seed planted, the promise of renewal whispered through the orchard, a song of falling apricots, fragile and beautiful in their impermanence. The soft afternoon sun filtered through the newly budding branches of the apricot trees, casting flickering shadows on the ground where the children sat, their faces a mixture of curiosity, sorrow, and quiet resistance. Grandmother Sato settled herself beneath the largest tree, her silver hair catching the light like a halo, and the children instinctively gathered closer. Hana stood a little to the side, watching the scene unfold with a gentle smile, her heart swelling with hope and the ache of memory. Long ago, Grandmother Sato began, her voice low and soothing like the murmur of a distant stream. These apricot trees were planted by our ancestors as symbols of renewal. Each blossom that appears after the harshest winters is a reminder that life, no matter how fragile, always finds a way to return. The children listened, some with rapt attention, others with guarded expressions. Taro, sitting quietly at the edge of the group, pulled out his worn notebook and began to sketch. His pencil moved hesitantly at first, tracing the outline of a single apricot blossom, its petals delicate and almost translucent in the afternoon light. As he sketched, the tension in his shoulders eased, his dark eyes reflecting the subtle beauty of the flowers he drew. Kiko, sitting nearer the center, frowned and crossed her arms. "Why do we have to listen to old stories?" she asked softly but firmly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken pain. "The past didn't save anyone. It only left us with empty homes and memories that hurt." Hana stepped forward, her voice gentle yet steady. "Kiko, I understand your anger. It's hard to believe in stories when everything feels so broken. But these trees," she motioned toward the blossoming branches above them, "they are more than just plants. They carry the whispers of those who came before us. When we care for them, we honor their lives and keep their spirits alive in a way that words alone cannot." Grandmother Sato nodded, her eyes warm but firm. "The apricot trees remember. They hold the stories of love and loss, of joy and sorrow. When you feel lost, look to the blossoms. They remind us that even after the darkest winters, new life will bloom again." The children fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Taro's pencil strokes grew more confident as he captured the intricate curves of the petals and the subtle veins weaving through each leaf. The act of drawing seemed to open something inside him, a quiet conversation between his grief and the healing promise of the orchard. Kiko's gaze softened slightly, though her posture remained defensive. But what if the blossoms don't come back? What if everything just ends? Hana knelt beside her, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. That fear is part of loving something deeply. But even if the blossoms fall, their seeds remain in the earth, waiting for the right moment to grow again. Our memories, too, can be like seeds, small, fragile, but full of the possibility of new beginnings. The breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of the apricots and the earth beneath them. The children breathed it in, some closing their eyes to savor the moment, others watching the petals dance lightly in the wind. The stories and the trees entwined with their own griefs, weaving a fragile tapestry of remembrance and hope. As the afternoon waned, Grandmother Sato shared more tales of villagers who had planted apricot trees after hardships passed, of families who found peace beneath their blossoms, of the unseen connections that bind the living to those who have gone. Hana's heart ached with the beauty and sorrow of it all, the impermanence of life made vivid in every word. Taro finally closed his notebook, a small smile touching his lips. He looked up at Hana and then at Kiko, who was staring thoughtfully at a cluster of buds. The orchard was no longer just a place of loss. It was becoming a sanctuary where memory breathed and new stories could begin. As they stood to leave, the sun dipped lower, and the apricot blossoms shimmered in the golden light, a fleeting, precious moment of beauty that promised, despite everything, the possibility of rebirth. Hana's voice, barely above a whisper, carried the hope she held close. "The trees will carry us forward, if we let them." The children walked back toward the village, their steps quieter, their hearts a little lighter, though the path ahead remained uncertain. Yet beneath the whispers of the blossoms, a fragile new understanding had taken root, one that would grow, slowly and gently, through the seasons to come. And as the last light faded, Hana lingered beneath the tree, her fingers tracing the rough bark, feeling the pulse of life beneath her touch. The sky hung heavy with the promise of rain, a dull gray veil stretching across the village like a shroud. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading leaves. a reminder of the landslide that had cleaved through the hillside not so long ago. Beneath this somber canopy, we gathered again in the clearing where the apricot orchard was slowly taking root. The saplings, slender and tentative, swayed gently in the growing wind, their fragile branches whispering secrets to one another. Kiko stood apart from the small circle, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, sharp eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and fear. Her voice broke the quiet like a sudden crack of thunder. "Why do we have to pretend everything is going to be okay?" she demanded, her words sharp and urgent. "Why can't we just remember what was lost? Why do we have to bury it beneath these trees?" Hana's gaze met hers, steady and soft, but there was a flicker of something raw beneath her calm exterior. "Because, Kiko," she replied gently, "these trees are not a forgetting. They are a way to hold on, to honor those we've lost while still finding a way forward." The tension between them was palpable, drawing the attention of the other children. Taro sat a little distance away, clutching his sketchbook, his dark eyes downcast. He didn't speak, but his presence was a quiet anchor. His fingers traced the contours of the apricot blossoms he had drawn earlier, each petal a silent testament to his own tangled grief. Kiko's defiance did not waver. "I don't want to move on. I want to remember. I want things to be the way they were," she said, her voice cracking with the weight of her denial. The wind picked up, stirring the leaves at our feet and sending a few raindrops pattering against the soil. Hana stepped closer, her delicate hands reaching out to touch the trembling branches of a young sapling. "Remembering is important," she said softly, "but so is living. These trees, they grow from the past, but they reach toward the future." Grandmother Sato approached quietly, her stooped figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Her silver hair caught the fading light, and her warm eyes held centuries of wisdom. She placed a comforting hand on Kiko's shoulder and spoke with gentle authority. "The apricot tree blossoms briefly each spring," she said, "and though the flowers fall swiftly, they leave seeds behind. Life is like this, it is fleeting, but always renewed." The children listened, some with skepticism, others with a glimmer of understanding. Even Kiko's sharp gaze softened for a moment, caught between her fear and the elders' calm reassurance. As the first rumbles of distant thunder rolled across the hills, I felt the weight of my own sorrow pressing against my chest. I was no stranger to grief. My own losses were etched deep within me, but I knew that to guide these children through their pain, I had to be stronger than the storm gathering both outside and within. The village itself seemed suspended in a fragile balance. Rebuilding was slow, and the scars of the landslide were fresh in every cracked wall and overturned stone. Fear lingered like the mist that clung to the valley each morning, and uncertainty shadowed every step we took toward recovery. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a stirring, a quiet resilience mirrored in the apricot saplings reaching upward despite the harsh wind. Each child's struggle was a thread in the tapestry of our collective healing, tangled and frayed, but bound by shared loss and tentative hope. I looked again at Kiko, the fire in her eyes tempered now by exhaustion and sorrow. "I know it's hard," I said softly, "but together we can find a way through this. The trees will teach us about patience, about letting go, and about the beauty of impermanence." She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. The storm clouds gathered overhead, but so did a fragile sense of possibility. In the cracked earth and whispered promises of the apricot blossoms, we found the first faint notes of a song we would learn to sing together, one of grief, resistance, and the slow, steady bloom of hope. As the rain began to fall in soft, persistent drops, the orchard seemed to shimmer with a quiet life. And in that moment, beneath the gathering storm, I vowed to hold steady for the children, for the village, and for the fragile future we were beginning to nurture. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as the apricot trees grew, so too would our capacity to heal. And so, beneath the darkening sky, we stood at the edge of change, each of us grappling with the shadows of the past and the promise of new beginnings. The storm clouds were gathering, but within us, a fragile light flickered, waiting to be kindled into something enduring. The journey was far from over, and the winds of doubt and fear would test us again. But for now, there was a moment of breath where hope whispered on the wind, carried in the silent song of falling apricots. The morning sun spilled softly over the village, casting long, pale shadows through the budding branches of the young apricot orchard. The air was crisp, but carried the faint scent of earth and early spring blossoms, a subtle promise of life quietly stirring beneath the surface. Hana stood among the rows of saplings, her slender fingers brushing gently over a tender leaf as she watched the children gather around her. Their faces, a mixture of curiosity and tentative hope, reflected the fragile beginnings of something new, not just the trees, but the healing that they represented. "Remember," Hana said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as though afraid to disturb the delicate moment, "these trees need patience. They do not rush to bloom, and neither should we." Taro knelt beside a sapling, his dark eyes focused intently on the small mound of soil he was smoothing around the roots. His slender hands moved with quiet care, the sketches of apricot blossoms he had drawn earlier still pressed in his notebook beside him. For him, the orchard was more than just trees. It was a silent sanctuary where his grief could take form without words. Kiko, standing a little apart with her arms crossed, watched Hana's gentle instructions with a guarded expression. Her sharp eyes flicked between the saplings and the others, her body tense, as though holding back a storm beneath her calm exterior. When Hana approached her with a small watering can, Kiko's hand trembled slightly before she took it, her stubbornness warring with the vulnerable fear that clung beneath her defiant stance. "You must be gentle," Hana reminded her, kneeling down to meet Kiko's gaze. "Too much water can harm the roots, just as too much sorrow can overwhelm the heart. Balance is everything." Kiko's jaw tightened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, as she bent to water the sapling, a sudden flicker of frustration escaped her, and she whispered, "What if the trees don't grow? What if everything just dies again?" Hana's eyes softened. "Then we will care for them again. Life is not a line, but a circle. We fall, but we rise like the seasons." She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Kiko's face with a tenderness that surprised them both. Nearby, Mika approached, her satchel filled with bundles of herbs and dried flowers. She knelt beside Hana, offering a gentle smile. "These herbs can help protect the saplings from pests and strengthen their roots," she said quietly. "And sometimes, a little healing for the earth helps the healing in our hearts." Hana nodded gratefully, accepting the bundles. The presence of Mika, with her knowledge of nature's remedies, brought a comforting warmth to the group. It was a reminder that the village's recovery was not hers alone. Others were ready to help nurture this fragile new beginning. Not long after, the sound of footsteps echoed through the orchard, steady and sure. Yuki, the village carpenter, arrived carrying wooden stakes and twine. His broad shoulders and work-worn hands marked him as a man accustomed to building things that lasted. "These supports will help the saplings withstand the winds," Yuki explained as he set to work, his movements calm and precise. "Just as we must support each other now." The children watched as he carefully tied the stakes, reinforcing the young trees with a quiet strength that seemed to seep into their very souls. The act was simple, yet profound, a visible sign that the village was beginning to bind itself together again, that they were no longer alone in their grief. As the day wore on, the children took turns tending the saplings. Taro's quiet focus deepened. He traced the veins of leaves with reverence, finding in the trees a language beyond words. Kiko's resistance softened in small moments when Hana's gentle encouragement broke through her defenses, allowing her to glimpse the possibility of hope woven into the fragile branches. At one point, Kiko stumbled, her hands trembling as she tried to steady a young tree. A sharp breath escaped her lips, frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's not fair," she muttered, voice cracking. "Why should we have to keep caring for something that might just break again?" Hana approached slowly, kneeling beside her. "Because it is in caring," she said gently, "that we find strength. Even if the tree falls, the roots remain, and from those roots new life can grow." Kiko's eyes flickered with tears she refused to shed, but the tightness in her chest eased just a little. The orchard was teaching them all difficult lessons about loss, about resilience, about the patience required to heal. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the village, the children gathered their tools and looked out over the rows of saplings. Each tree stood as a quiet testament to their efforts and their shared sorrow. Hana's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and melancholy. The work was only beginning, but the first fragile shoots of hope were growing. Mika's soft voice broke the silence. "Tomorrow I will bring more herbs, and perhaps some tea." Yuki nodded in agreement. "And I will be here in the morning to check on the supports. We will build this village back, branch by branch." Hana smiled, a rare and genuine curve of her lips. "Thank you. Together, we will tend these saplings and ourselves." The orchard whispered in the evening breeze, the faint rustle of leaves a song of quiet perseverance. Beneath the fading light, the children and the village began to find their footing once more. Rooted in the soil of grief, but reaching toward the fragile promise of renewal. As night settled over the village, Hana lingered a moment longer among the trees, her fingers tracing the delicate bark of a sapling. One day, she thought, these branches will bear fruit, and with it, new stories of life that outlast sorrow. But for now, they would tend the saplings, one careful step at a time, learning to nurture hope where loss had taken root. The weight of memory settled heavily around us, like the thick mist that clings to the valley each morning. As I watched Taro sit beneath the young apricot tree, his slender fingers gripping the worn pencil, I felt the ache that was not just his but a silent echo of all our grief. His eyes, dark and unfocused, traced the fragile blossoms on the branches above, as if searching for something that might bloom within himself. His sketchbook lay open, pages fluttering gently in the breeze, filled with delicate lines and shadows that captured not just petals, but the ghost of sorrow that clung to him like a second skin. I approached him quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile cocoon he had woven around himself. "Taro," I said softly, sitting down beside him on the cool earth. "Your drawings, they were beautiful." He did not look up, his voice barely a whisper. "It's easier to draw than to speak." I nodded, understanding the truth behind his words. Grief could be a prison, but sometimes the pencil was a key. "Whenever you were ready," I told him, "I'm here." But Taro's silence was a refuge he was not yet ready to leave. Meanwhile, Kiko's presence was like a storm brewing on the horizon. Her defiance was no longer subtle. It throbbed beneath every word she spoke, every sharp glance she cast my way. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the orchard in hues of rose and gold, she confronted me directly. "Why do you want us to forget?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and something deeper fear, perhaps. "Our families are gone. How can you tell us to move on like it's nothing?" I looked at her, the fierce fire in her eyes both heartbreaking and familiar. "Kiko," I said gently, "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to remember in a way that lets you live. The apricot trees, they bloom beautifully, but briefly. Their blossoms fall, and in that impermanence, there is a kind of peace." Her jaw tightened. "Peace sounds like giving up." "Not giving up," I replied, "but accepting. Accepting that life changes, that loss shapes us, but does not have to define us forever." Kiko turned away, the tightness in her stance telling me that her heart was still a battlefield. That evening, sensing the growing tension within the group, I sought out Grandmother Sato. Her small house smelled of dried herbs and old paper, a comforting sanctuary from the restless world outside. She smiled warmly when I entered, her silver hair catching the soft lamplight. "They were struggling," I said, sitting quietly beside her. She nodded knowingly. The weight of memory is a heavy burden for young hearts. But stories can carry it gently. The next day, Grandmother Sato gathered the children inside her home, a modest room warmed by a crackling fire. The children sat close, their faces a mixture of curiosity and guarded emotion. Grandmother's voice rose and fell like soft music as she told them an old tale. Long ago, she began, there was a village much like ours, where apricot trees grew in abundance. The villagers cherished the blossoms, but they knew the flowers lasted only a brief moment before falling to the earth. They learned to find joy in that fleeting beauty, knowing that each blossom was a gift, a reminder that life, like the petals, is ever-changing. The children listened intently, the story weaving threads of comfort through their sorrow. Taro's eyes brightened slightly, and even Kiko's defiance softened as she sat still, wrapped in the warmth of the tale. Afterward, as the children dispersed into the orchard, I remained behind, watching the gentle sway of the apricot branches. The rustling leaves whispered secrets of impermanence and hope. Memory, I realized, was not a chain but a root strong, deep, and capable of nurturing new growth. In the quiet moments that followed, I felt the fragile stirrings of acceptance taking hold, a delicate balance between sorrow and renewal. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in many weeks, I sensed that we might walk it together. Bound by the weight of memory and the promise of the apricot's brief bloom, the orchard, much like the children, was growing silently, patiently, and with a resilience born from the depths of grief. And as the sun dipped beneath the hills, casting long shadows over the land, I whispered a prayer to the unseen. May we find strength in the fleeting, and peace within the impermanent. Yet even as hope began to bud, I knew the journey was far from over. The coming days would test us all in ways we could not yet imagine. But for now, beneath the spreading branches, we held on to each other, to memory, and to the fragile, beautiful promise of tomorrow. The morning air was heavy with a chill that seemed to seep not only through the skin, but through the very bones of the village. Clouds hung low, casting a muted gray light over the apricot orchard, where the saplings stood in neat rows, their fragile branches trembling in the biting breeze. I stood at the edge of the field, watching the children gather reluctantly around the small patch of earth that we had been nurturing together, a symbol of hope, yet fragile as the hearts that tended it. Kiko was the first to break the brittle silence. Her sharp eyes, usually defiant and bright, now glimmered with a storm of emotions that she had tried so hard to bury. "Why do we even bother?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the quiet like a whip. "These trees won't bring back what we lost. None of this will." Her words were a bitter gust against the tender new growth, and I felt the air grow colder still. I approached her slowly, careful not to escalate the simmering tension. "Kiko," I said softly, "these trees are not meant to replace what was lost. They are here to remind us that life continues, even when it feels impossible." She shook her head, stepping back as if my words were a physical blow. "You don't understand. You lost your family, but you still have your memories. I have nothing left but anger and silence. How can you ask me to plant hope when all I feel is emptiness?" Her defiance was raw and unmasked, a mirror to the grief I had hidden beneath my calm exterior. I wanted to reach out, to soothe, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I remained silent, watching as the other children shifted uncomfortably, caught between their own pain and Kiko's fierce resistance. Taro, usually so quiet, stood apart from the group, clutching his sketchbook tightly. His dark eyes flickered between Kiko and me, reflecting a turmoil that mirrored their own. I had noticed his growing distance, the way his art became both a refuge and a prison. His slender fingers twitched as he sketched the scene unfolding before him, the broken branches, the tense faces, the fragile bonds stretching thin. As the argument escalated, voices rose and tempers flared. The orchard, once a safe haven, felt suddenly vulnerable, its delicate buds echoing the fragility of our collective spirit. I felt a familiar ache settle in my chest, the weight of my own sorrow mingling with the children's pain. Was I failing them? Could I lead them through this storm of grief and anger? Or would we all be lost in the aftermath? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm us, a gentle presence emerged from the shadows of the trees. Grandmother Sato's stooped figure approached, her silver hair catching the faint light like threads of moonshine. Her warm eyes, deep with years of wisdom and quiet humor, fell upon the tense group. "Children," she said softly, her voice steady and soothing, "life is like these apricot trees. They bloom and wither, fall and rise again. The pain we carry is part of that cycle. It is not a barrier but a passage to acceptance, to healing. Her words hung in the air, a balm to raw nerves. Kiko's defiance faltered, and she looked away, the sharp edges of her anger blunted by the elder's calm assurance. Taro lowered his sketchbook, meeting grandmother Sato's gaze with a flicker of understanding. I stepped forward, my own voice trembling with renewed resolve. We are not alone in this. Our grief binds us, but so does our hope. Together, we can nurture more than trees, we can nurture each other. The orchard, battered yet enduring, seemed to breathe alongside us. The fragile branches swayed gently, as if responding to the fragile peace settling in our hearts. Though the fractures were raw, this moment marked the first step toward mending not just the land, but the broken spirits within it. As the day waned, shadows lengthening across the soil, I felt the weight of my mission anew. The path ahead was uncertain, the wounds fresh, but amidst the cracks, light found its way in. And with it, the promise that even in our fractures, we could grow. The orchard stood quiet beneath the gathering dusk, a testament to resilience and the fragile beauty of healing, as if the trees themselves whispered a song of hope that only the broken could truly hear. And still, the question lingered in my mind. Could we truly overcome the fractures within ourselves before the next storm came to test us all? The answer I knew would blossom in time. The orchard was no longer just a patch of earth scarred by tragedy. It was becoming a quiet sanctuary where life whispered its tentative return. The apricot saplings, once mere fragile sticks planted with trembling hands, now bore the first signs of awakening. Tiny buds, pale and promising, clung to slender branches like whispered secrets of spring yet to come. I sat among the children beneath the spreading branches, the late afternoon sun filtering through the delicate leaves and dappling our skin in soft gold. The air carried the scent of moist earth and faint traces of apricot blossoms, a fragrance that seemed to mingle with the ache and hope that hovered over us all. Around me, the soft murmur of the village felt distant, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird returning to the recovering land. Taro was nearby, his slender form hunched slightly as he balanced a worn sketchbook on his knees. His charcoal pencil moved with surprising delicacy, tracing the curves of apricot petals that seemed to dance on the page. His dark eyes, usually shadowed with silence, flickered with a fragile light that no one had seen in weeks. Watching him, I felt the slow unfolding of something precious, the first cracks in the walls he had built around his grief. "Taro," I whispered softly, careful not to disturb the fragile piece, "your drawings are beautiful." He glanced up, a faint smile flickering before retreating. "It helps," he murmured, eyes returning to the page. "Sometimes the words get stuck, but the blossoms, they say what I can't." Near the orchard's edge, Kiko stood apart, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her sharp eyes, usually blazing with defiance, were fixed on the young trees with a reluctant softness that betrayed her usual bravado. A gentle breeze stirred the branches, scattering pale petals like whispered memories across the ground. She exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible but heavy with unshed emotion. "Kiko," I ventured, approaching with cautious steps, "the trees are growing. They remember. We remember." She turned to me, her gaze guarded but less rigid. "I don't know if I'm ready to remember," she said, voice low but steady. "Some things feel like they should stay buried." I nodded, knowing the truth of her words. Healing was not a straight path, but a winding road where fear and hope walked hand in hand. "It's okay to be afraid," I said gently. "But the trees teach us that even in winter, life waits beneath the surface." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the orchard, I walked slowly among the saplings. My fingers brushed tenderly over the soft buds, feeling the pulse of life in their fragile forms. The earth beneath them was dark and rich, a promise of renewal despite the scars it bore. "Each bud is a song," I whispered, as if sharing a secret with the wind. "A song of falling apricots, of endings and beginnings entwined." The children gathered closer, their eyes reflecting the fading light and the growing warmth in their hearts. In that silent communion, grief felt less like a heavy chain and more like a thread weaving us together, fragile, yet unbreakable. Taro closed his sketchbook at last, his gaze meeting mine. Maybe, he said softly, we can grow, even after everything. Kiko looked up at the sky, where the first stars began to appear. Maybe, she echoed, her voice barely a whisper but carrying a weight of reluctant hope. And beneath the quiet boughs of the apricot trees, I felt it too, the slow, silent growth of something new, fragile yet fierce, promising that even amidst loss, life could bloom again. But the journey was far from over. As the night deepened, a question lingered in the cool air. Would our fragile hope be enough to withstand the shadows still lurking in our hearts, and the unpredictable challenges that lay ahead? The song of falling apricots had begun, delicate and haunting, and we had only just learned to listen. Outside the village, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the weight of memory and the promise of change. Inside the orchard, beneath the tender buds and fragile branches, a quiet revolution was taking root, one of healing, of acceptance, of the gentle courage it took to face impermanence and still choose to grow. The apricot trees stood as silent witnesses to our sorrow and our hope, their silent growth a testament to the resilience of the human heart. And as I looked at the children, at Taro's softening gaze, at Kiko's subtle release of tension, I knew that though the road ahead would be long and uncertain, we had taken a vital step together. The silent growth of the orchard was not just the sprouting of trees. It was the blossoming of something deeper, the fragile, tentative beginnings of new life within us all. And so, beneath the watchful sky, we waited, listened, and hoped for the next chapter waiting to unfold beneath the falling apricots. The morning light spilled softly over the village, filtering through the scattered clouds that lingered like a gentle promise. The once shattered homes now stood as quiet skeletons of resilience, their timbers freshly joined and roofs propped with sturdy beams. Yuki moved among the villagers with a calm authority, his calloused hand steady as he guided the younger men and women in repairing what nature had so ruthlessly taken. Hana watched from the edge of the gathering, her eyes tracing the slow rhythm of rebuilding, the hammering, the sawing, the careful fitting of each board. It was a symphony of renewal, a collective heartbeat pulsing through the village's veins. She felt the weight of months of sorrow beginning to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing determination. Taro lingered nearby, his slender frame hunched over a small sketchbook. His pencil moved swiftly, capturing the outlines of the new beams and the faces of those around him. Hana approached, her voice a soft murmur. "Your drawings are beautiful, Taro." He looked up, eyes dark but shimmering with something new, a flicker of trust. "I like to remember the good things," he said quietly. "Like the way the light hits the wood." Kiko stood a little apart, arms crossed, her sharp eyes flicking between the workers and Hana. The stubborn set of her jaw softened as she observed the steady progress. When Hana beckoned her over, she hesitated but came, shoulders tense yet open to the possibility of change. "You see," Hana began, kneeling beside the apricot saplings, "each nail driven into these beams is like a promise. Not just to rebuild walls, but to rebuild lives." Kiko's gaze fell to the tender green leaves of the saplings. "But what if they don't survive? What if everything falls apart again?" Hana reached out, brushing her fingers lightly along a slender branch. "Then we will plant again, and again. Because in every ending, there is a new beginning." Sora, the youngest of the children, tugged at Hana's sleeve with a bright smile. "I want to help build, too." Yuki chuckled, his broad shoulders turning as he spotted the small boy. "There's a place for everyone here, Sora. Even little hands can do big things." As the day stretched on, the village became a hive of quiet activity. Mika moved through the groups, her herbal teas and salves offering relief to tired muscles and aching spirits. Her gentle laughter lifted the air, weaving threads of comfort into the fabric of the day. Grandmother Sato sat beneath the shade of a blossoming apricot tree, her silver hair catching the light like a halo. She shared stories of the village's past, tales of ancestors who had faced hardship and loss, yet found strength in the earth and each other. Her voice was a soothing balm, reminding all that they were part of a living chain, unbroken despite the pain. As afternoon waned into dusk, The newly rebuilt homes stood firm, their shadows stretching long and peaceful over the soil. Lanterns were lit, casting warm pools of golden light where neighbors gathered to share food, stories, and laughter, fragile and precious as the first blossoms on the apricot trees. Hana lingered beneath the canopy of leaves, feeling the pulse of life around her. The children came close, their hands dirt-streaked but hearts lighter. Taro showed her the sketches he had made, each line a step toward healing. Kiko, standing beside him, offered a tentative smile, a crack in the armor of resistance. "We were growing," Hana whispered, almost to herself. "Not just the trees, but us." The village, once broken and silent, now breathed with quiet strength. In the shared labor, the stories exchanged, and the gentle tending of saplings, the people found a new family, one rooted in grief, but blossoming with hope. Night deepened, and as the stars appeared overhead, Hana thought of the days ahead. The road would not be easy, but gathered strength, like the roots of the apricot trees, would hold them fast through storms yet to come. And in that thought was a seed of peace, waiting patiently to bloom. The days that followed were filled with steady work and quiet moments of reflection. The village, once a place of shattered dreams, began to pulse with tentative life. Children played among the budding branches of the orchard, their laughter a fragile thread weaving through the air. Taro's drawings grew more intricate, the lines capturing not only the shapes around him, but the emotions he could not yet voice. Hana encouraged his art, sensing in it a bridge between his silent grief and the world he longed to rejoin. Kiko, once so fierce in her denial, slowly lowered her defenses. She helped Yuki fashion supports for the frail saplings, her hands steady though her eyes betrayed lingering fears. When she spoke of her family, it was with a voice softened by acceptance, the sharp edges of loss beginning to smooth. Hana found strength in their small victories, in the way the community gathered each evening beneath the apricot trees to share stories and dreams. Mika's herbal remedies soothed their wounds, both visible and hidden, while grandmother Sato's tales wove a tapestry of continuity and hope. The village was no longer a place of endings, but the fertile ground for new beginnings. And as the first petals of the apricot blossoms unfolded, so too did the hearts of those who tended them, fragile, open, and ready to grow. Yet beneath the calm surface, Hana knew the path ahead held storms both literal and unseen. But for now, in this moment of gathering strength, there was only the soft promise of dawn and the gentle music of life renewed. The song of falling apricots whispered through the air, carrying with it the hope of all who had lost and all who dared to hope again. Even as the village settled into its new rhythm, moments of quiet reflection punctuated the days. Hana often found herself beneath the apricot trees, watching the children as they tended their fragile charges. Each touch, each whispered word to the saplings was a testament to their growing resilience. One afternoon, as a breeze stirred the orchard, Taro approached her with a sketchbook in hand. "Look," he said softly, opening it to reveal a detailed drawing of the village homes rebuilt. Trees blossoming, children playing. "This is the way I see us now." Hana smiled, her heart swelling with pride and tenderness. "It's beautiful, Taro. You've captured more than the village. You've captured hope." Kiko, standing close by, nodded. Maybe we really can move forward." The three of them shared a quiet moment, the weight of their shared past balanced by the fragile lightness of the future. In the distance, Yuki hammered the last board into place on a repaired home, his steady rhythm a heartbeat driving the village forward. Mika's soft ladder drifted from the herbal garden, mingling with the rustling leaves. Grandmother Sato watched them all with eyes that had seen many seasons of loss and renewal. "The roots run deep," she said softly to Hana. "Stronger than any storm." Hana nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle deep within her. The village was healing, slowly but surely, and in that healing was the quiet strength to face whatever lay ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the apricot orchard glowed softly in the twilight. Each blossom a fragile beacon of life, each falling petal a whispered promise that even in loss, hope endures. And with that promise, the village breathed anew, ready to face the future together. The late afternoon sun filtered gently through the sparse canopy of apricot branches, casting long, wavering shadows across the soft earth of the orchard. The air was thick with the scent of budding flowers, and the faint whisper of a breeze that stirred the leaves, setting a fragile rhythm to the silence that had settled over the trees. I stood quietly beneath the branches, my fingers brushing tenderly over a cluster of pale blossoms, feeling the fragility of their petals against my skin. It was a moment of delicate stillness, a pause in the relentless flow of days marked by the slow but steady growth of the orchard, and yet, beneath the surface of this calm, a storm was gathering. Kiko's sharp footsteps broke the stillness as she appeared at the edge of the trees, her small frame tense and eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and fear. She stormed towards me, her voice trembling but fierce, shattering the quiet like a sudden crack of thunder. "Why do you make us do this?" she demanded, her words laced with raw pain. "Why do you want us to forget, to pretend like nothing happened?" Her accusation hung between us, heavy and unwelcome. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the weight of grief that had settled deep within me, since the landslide took everything from us. I had known this moment would come, the time when the children's pain would no longer be veiled by silence or gentle lessons, but would erupt in all its messy, unyielding truth. I took a slow breath, steadying myself against the tide of emotion rising in her voice. "Kiko," I said softly, stepping closer beneath the swaying branches, "I'm not asking you to forget. None of us could. But these trees, they are not a lie, nor a way to erase what we have lost. They are living memories, a way to hold on to those we loved without being trapped in the pain." She shook her head fiercely, eyes glistening. "It's easy for you to say. You had your family. You had." Her voice broke, and suddenly the defiance faltered, revealing a fragile core of fear and sorrow. "How can you stand here and tell me to move on? How can you ask me to plant over their graves like it's some kind of promise?" The words struck me with the force of a fresh wound. I had spent so long holding my own grief tightly, carefully folding it away to be the steady one for the children. But now, looking into Kiko's eyes, I saw my own despair mirrored back at me, the loss, the loneliness, the unbearable ache of absence. I swallowed the lump in my throat and allowed the walls I had built around my sorrow to crumble just enough to speak my truth. "I lost my husband and my parents in the landslide," I confessed, my voice trembling. "Sometimes the pain feels like it will swallow me whole. But these trees, they give me something to hold on to, something that grows even when I feel like I cannot." Kiko's defiance wavered, and for a moment, the sharp edges of her anger softened into something more vulnerable. The tension between us shifted, and the weight of unspoken grief hung in the air like a fragile thread waiting to be pulled. Her shoulders slumped, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "I'm scared," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I'm scared that if I let go, I'll lose them forever." I stepped closer and reached out, resting my hand gently on hers. "You won't lose them," I said quietly. "They live in our memories, in these trees, and in the love we carry. It's not about letting go, it's about learning how to carry the pain with us, so it doesn't break us." The orchard was silent again, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird settling for the evening. Petals drifted down like pale snow, settling gently on the earth where we stood. In that quiet moment, the space between us felt lighter, filled with the fragile promise of understanding. We sat side by side beneath the fading light, the sky painted in soft pastels of pink and lavender. The world seemed to hold its breath with us, as if acknowledging the fragile beginnings of acceptance taking root. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, I felt a quiet hope stir within me. The path ahead would not be easy. Grief was a winding road with many turns, but in Kiko's tears, I saw the first glimmers of healing. And in that, the orchard, the village, and I could all find a way forward, rooted in the enduring strength of memory and the tender beauty of impermanence. But even as hope blossomed, a quiet question lingered in the twilight air: could this fragile acceptance endure the coming storms, both within and beyond us? The answer would unfold with the turning of seasons, in the lives we nurtured and the memories we chose to carry. And so, beneath the falling apricot petals, our story continued uneasy, raw, but alive with the possibility of renewal. The sky had grown heavy, a thickening gray that swallowed the afternoon light. I stood at the edge of the orchard, watching the dark clouds roll over the hills, their swollen bellies pregnant with rain and wrath. A restless wind rattled the fragile branches of the young apricot trees, bending them as though testing their strength. My palms were clammy, but I pressed my hands against the rough bark of a sapling, drawing a quiet breath to steady the rising tension within me. "The storm is coming," I murmured to the children gathered near the footpath, their small faces pale but alert. Taro clutched his sketchbook close to his chest, eyes wide as he followed the shifting shadows above. Kiko stood apart, arms crossed, her jaw tight. Even grandmother Sato, seated on the bench beneath the old camphor tree, furrowed her brow, her silver hair stirred by the sudden gusts. "We cannot let the orchard be destroyed," I said firmly, turning to face them. "These saplings are more than trees, they are the memory of our lost families, the promise of new beginnings. If the storm tears them down, it will feel as if hope itself is being swept away." Kiko's eyes flashed with defiance. "What if the storm wins? Maybe it's better to accept that some things can't be saved." "That's exactly why we must try," I replied softly, stepping closer. "Because fighting for what matters is how we heal." The villagers began to gather, drawn by the urgency in my voice. Maika arrived with bundles of cloth and herbs, her hands moving swiftly to prepare protective wraps soaked in calming scents. Yuki appeared shortly after, his broad shoulders carrying wooden stakes and tools, his steady presence a quiet reassurance. Together, we formed a circle around the orchard, the children moving alongside the adults, as we worked to brace each tree. I watched as Taro knelt beside a slender sapling, his fingers trembling as he tied a cloth around its trunk. The wind tugged at his coat, but he held firm, his dark eyes focused and resolute. Nearby, Kiko hesitated at the orchard's edge, rain beginning to fall in cold droplets. Slowly, she stepped forward, her hands trembling as she helped secure the protective cloths, her defiance softening into something like acceptance. "It's going to be all right," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "We will endure this, together." The first rumbles of thunder echoed over the hills as the storm drew closer, but in that moment, beneath the gathering clouds and amid the sheltered trees, we found a fragile strength. Our hands, young and old, intertwined with purpose, our breaths mingled in the cool air, steady and sure. The apricot orchard, our living memorial, stood guarded not just by wood and cloth, but by the unyielding spirit of a community refusing to surrender to despair. Night was falling fast when the first sheets of rain began to hammer the earth, drumming against leaves and rooftops alike. We gathered at the edge of the orchard, eyes scanning the shadows where the saplings bent and swayed. The storm was no longer a distant threat, it was upon us. "Stay close," I urged the children, my voice low but calm. "We will face this night together." Taro's hand found mine, small and trembling but steadying. Kiko, standing beside him, nodded quietly, her earlier resistance melting into a shared resolve. Grandmother Sato hummed an ancient melody, her voice a steady thread weaving through the roar of the wind. As lightning tore across the sky and thunder shook the ground beneath our feet, I held on to a single truth. No matter how fierce the storm, life like the apricot trees would endure. And in that endurance, we would find our way back from the darkness. The night ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in many moons, I felt the fragile stirrings of hope take root inside me. The storm would test us all, but we were ready to fight not just for survival, but for the promise of new beginnings blossoming in every falling apricot. And so, with the tempest raging around us, we prepared to stand guard, united beneath the restless sky. The night descended over the village like a dark curtain, thick with the promise of fury. Hana stood at the edge of the orchard, her breath catching as the first gusts of wind tore through the fragile branches of the young apricot trees. The sky roared with thunder, and rain began to fall, at first a steady drizzle, then a relentless torrent, drumming on the leaves and earth. The landslide had already taken so much from this village. Now nature seemed bent on testing them once again. Children gathered close, their faces pale and eyes wide. Taro clutched his notebook to his chest, the pages already damp from the rain. Kiko stood nearby, her usual defiance muted into focused determination. Even little Sora, shivering but wide-eyed, clung to Hana's sleeve. Hana's heart ached at the sight of these fragile souls, yet she knew this night was more than a test of the orchard. It was a crucible for their healing. "We must cover the trees," Hana said softly, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Every branch, every sapling, they are our future." The group moved swiftly, struggling to secure tarps and wooden stakes against the rising storm. Yuki and Mika joined them, steady and strong, lending hands and calm words. The village, though battered by grief, gathered in a circle of resolve around the orchard. Rain soaked through their clothes, chilled them to the bone, but no one faltered. At one point, a sudden gust threatened to rip away a cover, and Hana lunged forward, grasping at the wet fabric with trembling hands. "Hold on!" she called, her voice cracking but fierce. Kiko and Taro rushed to help, their fingers numb but unyielding. The saplings trembled beneath their shelter, fragile yet enduring. Hours passed in a blur of cold and exhaustion. Hana felt the weight of her own sorrow press heavily against her chest, but she pushed it down, drawing strength from the children's presence. She whispered encouragements, their names a litany against the storm's rage. Taro, his face pale and soaked, found a small pocket of relative shelter beneath a large tree. From his soaked backpack, he pulled out a soaked notebook and a stub of pencil. With shaking hands, he began to sketch lightning striking the dark sky, the battered trees, the steadfast figures holding fast. His drawing was a quiet rebellion against despair, a testament that even in chaos, beauty could persist. Kiko, usually so quick to argue and resist, surprised Hana. She moved silently among the saplings, adjusting the tarps, pressing stakes deeper into the ground, working with a focused intensity that spoke of a profound internal shift. The defiance in her sharp eyes softened, replaced by a fierce protectiveness not just for the trees, but for the fragile hope they embodied. The night stretched on, the storm's fury unabated. At times, Hana felt her strength wane, her fingers numb, her body trembling. Yet, each time she faltered, the children's presence anchored her. Their shared struggle forged a bond stronger than words, a quiet promise that together they would endure. Outside, the wind screamed like a living thing, tearing at the fabric of their shelter. The rain hammered the earth, flooding the small paths and turning the soil to mud. But inside the circle of their steadfast care, the apricot orchard survived. The saplings bent but did not break, cradled by hands determined to nurture life even in the harshest of nights. As the first pale fingers of dawn brushed the horizon, the storm began to relent. The rain softened to a drizzle. The wind dropped to a whisper. Hana stood amidst the drenched orchard, the children gathered close, their faces drawn and wary, but their eyes bright with quiet triumph. She reached out, touching the bark of a young tree, slick with rain, leaves trembling in the cooling morning air. "We made it," she whispered, voice thick with tears she did not shame. Around her the children nodded, a fragile smile breaking across Kiko's lips, a steady gaze from Taro that held a new light. The night had tested them, pushed them to the edge of their endurance. But it had also woven them closer, rooted them as deeply as the apricot trees they had fought to save. In the silence after the storm, Hana felt the stirring of something fragile and fierce, hope. Yet she knew this was not the end. The orchard still needed care, the village still needed healing. But tonight, they had stood together against the wild forces of nature and sorrow. Tonight, they had survived not just the storm, but the darkness within. And as the first apricot blossoms would soon bloom, so too would the quiet resilience of this small village, rising from the ruins, singing the song of falling apricots. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence thick and heavy, as if the earth itself was catching its breath. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in muted strokes of gray and pale gold. I stepped outside my small home, the air cool and damp against my skin. breathing in the scent of wet earth mingled with the faint sweetness of crushed apricot blossoms scattered across the ground. The orchard was battered but standing. Branches hung low, heavy with rain and bruised fruit, some broken and scattered like fragile memories strewn across the soil. I moved among the saplings, each one a testament to the delicate balance between fragility and strength. My fingers brushed the rough bark, feeling the pulse of life beneath, steady and enduring. It was in this quiet communion that I found a whisper of comfort, a gentle assurance that even after the darkest night, dawn would come. From the edge of the orchard, I saw the children emerging from the shadows of their shelters, faces streaked with dirt and rain, eyes wide but bright with a tentative spark. Taro was the first to approach, clutching his notebook close to his chest, as if it were a talisman against the lingering fear. Kiko followed, her usual defiance softened by exhaustion, her gaze lingering on the damaged trees as if searching for signs of hope. "They're still here," I said softly, more to myself than to them. "They survived." Taro nodded, a small smile flickering at the corners of his lips. "Like us," he whispered. We gathered together beneath the heavy boughs, the broken breeze carrying the scent of rain and earth. Grandmother Sato joined us, her stooped figure silhouetted against the growing light. Her silver hair, damp from the storm, clung to her temples as she began to speak in her calm, steady voice. "There is an old story," she said, "of a tree that faced many winters, its branches battered by wind and snow. Each season, it seemed to lose more than it could bear, yet in spring, it blossomed anew, reminding us that endings are but beginnings in disguise." Her words settled over us like a balm, weaving together the threads of sorrow and hope. The children listened intently, their grief tempered by the promise of renewal. Mika appeared then, carrying a basket of herbs and bandages. She moved with practiced grace, tending to small cuts and bruises, her presence a quiet comfort. Yuki arrived soon after, his hands calloused but gentle as he began inspecting the wooden supports he had built for the orchard. His calm diligence was a steadying force amid the fragile aftermath. Together we began to clear the debris, our movements slow but purposeful. The earth beneath our feet was soft, yielding to the touch, fertile despite the storm's fury. As I watched the children work side by side, I saw in their faces the first glimmers of something I had thought lost hope. It was a fragile thing, delicate as the apricot blossoms, but it was there, growing. That night, as I sat by the window, the moon casting silvery light over the orchard, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what we had endured. The impermanence of suffering was a lesson cruelly taught, yet within it lay the strength of endurance. We were like the trees battered, bruised, but still standing, still reaching toward the light. Taro's sketches now filled with scenes of resilience, twisted branches blooming against gray skies. Kiko's sharp eyes held a softer light, her resistance giving way to quiet acceptance. The village, scarred but unbroken, was beginning to breathe again. In the quiet aftermath, beneath the battered apricot trees, the song of falling petals whispered a promise that even in loss, life would find a way to bloom once more. And in that promise, I found a fragile peace, the first step toward healing not just for myself, but for all of us. The storm had tested us, laid bare our fears and our fragility. But it had also shown us the strength that comes from standing together, rooted in shared grief and hope. As dawn broke fully, spilling warm light across the land, I felt a tentative but unshakable certainty: we would endure. We would grow, and from the darkness we would rise. Yet even as the village stirred awake, I knew this was but one moment in a longer journey. The road ahead would be hard, paved with memories and challenges yet unseen. But for now, beneath the battered branches and the soft, falling petals, we had found a beginning, and that was enough to carry us forward, step by fragile step. The first light of spring seeped softly into the village, painting the apricot orchard with the delicate hues of dawn. Hana stood at the edge of the grove, her breath catching gently as the blossoms stirred in the morning breeze. Pale pink petals, fragile and fleeting, danced like whispers in the air, their scent mingling with the damp earth beneath her feet. It was a sight she had longed for through the cold months, a quiet promise that life could indeed bloom anew amid the traces of loss. Around her, the children gathered hesitantly, their faces still shadowed by the weight of the past, but brightened by the tender spectacle before them. Taro knelt with his notebook, carefully sketching the buds and flowers, his dark eyes reflecting the soft light. Kiko stood apart, arms crossed, but her sharp gaze softened by the tender scene unfolding. Even she seemed caught in the fragile magic of the moment. Hana walked slowly beneath the branches, her fingers brushing over the petals, each touch a silent benediction. The trees, once mere saplings planted over graves, had grown into a living tribute, fragile yet resilient, much like the village itself. She thought of the storm that had threatened to undo their efforts, the nights spent shielding the orchard from the winds, and the countless moments of doubt and sorrow. Yet here they were, blossoming, breathing alive. Grandmother Sato approached, her silver hair catching the light as she settled beneath the largest tree. Her voice, steady and warm, wove a story of ancestors who had planted apricot trees to honor the dead and celebrate the fleeting beauty of life. The children listened, some skeptical, others rapt, as the elders' words bridged the past with the present, reminding them that memory was not a chain but a root from which new growth sprang. Kiko shifted closer, her defiant stance softened by the elder's tale. Hana noted the subtle change and opening, a willingness to embrace rather than resist. Taro's sketches grew more detailed, his quiet grief finding expression in the delicate lines of petals and branches. As the afternoon deepened, villagers began to gather, drawn by the promise of the orchard's bloom. Micah arrived with a basket of herbs, offering fragrant teas that mingled with the scent of apricot flowers. Yuki brought sturdy benches fashioned from fallen trees, their rough edges softened by the hands of those who had rebuilt much of the village. Laughter and soft melodies floated on the breeze, weaving through the orchard like a balm. The small celebration was humble but profound, a communal embrace of impermanence and renewal. Hana watched as children chased drifting petals, their laughter light and unburdened, a fragile joy taking root. She felt the stirring of peace deep within, a quiet acceptance that life's beauty was found not in permanence, but in the fleeting, in the moments that shone briefly before fading. As dusk settled, the orchard bathed in the golden glow of lanterns. Hana lingered beneath the blossoms. She whispered a prayer to the wind, a song of gratitude for the promise of spring, for the strength born of sorrow, and for the hope blossoming in every falling apricot. The village, once shattered, was waking softly, steadily to the possibility of new beginnings. And yet, as the petals fell like gentle rain, Hana knew that the journey was far from over. The orchard's bloom was but one chapter in their shared story, a delicate song of impermanence, memory, and the enduring power of love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments to cherish and endure. But for now, beneath the soft canopy of flowering branches, hope blossomed with a quiet, resilient grace. The wind carried the scent of apricots through the village streets, a subtle reminder that life, like the petals, was meant to be treasured even as it slipped away. Hana took a deep breath, feeling the promise of spring settle within her heart, ready to face the days ahead with a gentle strength born of sorrow and the beauty of impermanence. "Look," she whispered to the children gathered near, "even the petals that fall nourish the earth. So do our memories nourish our hearts." Taro smiled softly and Kiko nodded, a fragile peace resting in their eyes. The village was waking, the orchard blooming, and with each falling apricot, a new song began, one of healing, hope, and the endless cycles of life. The promise of spring was theirs, and Hana knew they would hold it, tender and true, beneath the ever-changing sky. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the apricot orchard, where delicate pink blossoms trembled softly in the light breeze. I stood among the saplings with the children, my hands steady but heart full of quiet anticipation. Today was a day unlike any before, one where we would not only tend to the trees, but also honor the memories rooted deeply in the soil beneath them. "Come, gather close," I said softly, beckoning the children to form a small circle. Their eyes, a mixture of curiosity and lingering sorrow, followed me as I reached into the woven basket at my feet. Inside lay small wooden plaques, each carefully inscribed with the names of those they had lost, their parents, siblings, grandparents. Each name was a whispered echo of love and loss, carved with care as if to capture the essence of those who had vanished too soon. Taro took his plaque with trembling hands. I noticed the way his dark eyes lingered on the smooth wood, the weight of his grief balanced by a quiet determination. Beside him, Kiko's fingers clenched tightly around hers. I caught the flicker of defiance in her sharp gaze, but also sensed the fragile thread of acceptance beginning to weave through her heart. These plaques, I explained, are not just markers, they are bridges between the past and the present. Every time we care for the apricot trees, we remember those who nurtured us with their love. Through this, they live on in the gentle sway of branches and the bloom of petals. Grandmother Sato, her silver hair catching the sunlight like strands of woven moonlight, stepped forward with a smile that held centuries of wisdom. In our ancestors' stories, she began, her voice a warm embrace, the apricot tree is a symbol of resilience. It blooms even after the harshest winters and storms. It teaches us that life continues, even when it seems broken. The children listened, some nodding, others silent, their faces reflecting the deep stillness of the moment. I watched as Taro sank down beneath the boughs, his sketchbook open on his lap. His pencil moved swiftly, tracing the delicate petals with a tenderness I had not seen in weeks. Through his art, Taro was speaking a language of healing, one that words had yet to find. Kiko remained standing, her usual defiant stance softened by the dappled light filtering through the trees. After a long pause, she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hana," she said, "I'm scared. I don't want to forget them, but maybe I can hold them differently now." Her confession hung in the air, fragile as the blossoms around us. I reached out, gently touching her shoulder. "That's all any of us can do," I replied. "Hold them in our hearts, and let the trees carry their memories forward." The ritual began as the children knelt by their respective apricot trees, planting the plaques carefully into the earth. Their fingers brushed the soil, mingling grief with hope, sorrow with renewal. The village elders looked on, their warm smiles a testament to the enduring spirit of our community. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the orchard seemed to breathe with us, each rustle of leaves a whispered prayer, each falling petal a fleeting moment of beauty and remembrance. In that sacred space, the boundaries between past and present blurred, and the seeds of memory took root alongside the saplings. I found myself caught between the melancholy of loss and the gentle promise of rebirth, a feeling that ebbed and flowed like the tides. The children's laughter, soft and tentative, began to mingle with the songs of birds returning to the branches. It was a symphony of healing, composed in the key of impermanence. As dusk painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, I gathered the children once more beneath the blossoming canopy. "Remember," I said, "each petal that falls is a song of those who came before us, and a promise that life, in all its fleeting beauty, continues." Kiko's eyes glistened as she nodded, and Taro's smile, quiet but genuine, warmed the chill of evening. Grandmother Sato's stories had sewn threads of continuity into our hearts, binding us to the past even as we stepped forward into the unknown. In the stillness that followed, I felt the weight of my own grief lighten, carried away on the breeze with the falling apricot petals. The orchard was no longer just a place of sorrow, but a living testament to resilience, memory, and hope, a sanctuary where the seeds of memory blossomed alongside the promise of tomorrow. And so, beneath the gentle watch of the blooming apricot trees, we planted not only wood and roots, but also the fragile beginnings of healing, each one a testament to the enduring power of love and remembrance. The days ahead would not be without sorrow, but they would be filled with the quiet strength that comes from embracing impermanence and finding beauty in every fleeting moment. For in the song of falling apricots, we had discovered a melody of hope that would carry us through the seasons to come. As night settled over the village, I lingered under a tree, feeling the soft petals brush against my cheek like whispered blessings. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew within the fragile bloom of each apricot flower there was the promise of new life, new memories, and the gentle courage to move forward. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I closed my eyes and listened to the orchard's song, the song of falling apricots, carrying us all toward the light of a new spring. The gentle hum of bees and the soft rustling of apricot blossoms filled the air as I wandered slowly through the orchard. This place, once scarred and silent, now bloomed with life and laughter. Each tree stood as a testament not merely to survival, but to the strength we had forged together, rooted deep in the soil of our shared sorrow. It had not been an easy journey. I remembered the early days, when grief lay heavy like an unyielding fog, and the children's eyes reflected the storm within their hearts. Yet, here they were, Taro carefully sketching the delicate petals of flowers, Kiko offering steady hands to Grandmother Sato's gentle guidance, and all of us bound by the quiet promise of new beginnings. Taro approached, holding out a worn notebook. "Look," he said softly, his voice steady but humble. I bent to see the lines and shades he had drawn, the orchard in full bloom, alive with color and light. It was more than art. It was hope etched on paper. "It's beautiful, Taro," I whispered. "You've captured something very important." A subtle smile touched his lips. "I think I'm beginning to understand." Meanwhile, Kiko moved nearby, her sharp eyes softened as she planted a new sapling beside Grandmother Sato. The defiance that once marked her stance had melted into a quiet determination, reflecting acceptance rather than resistance. Watching her, I felt a swell of pride, not just for her, but for all of us who had learned to embrace impermanence and find strength in vulnerability. The village itself had changed. Once fractured by loss and uncertainty, it now pulsed with a renewed energy. Meika's herbal remedies soothed more than aching bodies, they comforted souls. Yuki's steady hands rebuilt not only homes but hope itself. Our community was knitting itself back together, thread by delicate thread. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of pink and lavender, the villagers gathered beneath the blossoming trees. Lanterns flickered gently, casting warm pools of light on faces lined with memory and resilience. Stories were shared, tales of ancestors who had weathered their own storms, of apricot trees that had stood as silent witnesses to generations of life and death. I found myself speaking quietly, my voice steady yet touched with emotion. "These trees," I said, "carry our memories. They remind us that even in loss, there is beauty. Even in endings, there is a beginning." A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the soft sigh of the evening breeze through the branches. In that moment, I understood fully, this orchard was more than a garden. It was the heart of our village, beating anew with every blossom and every falling apricot. As the night deepened, I lingered beneath the branches, feeling the weight of what we had built not just in soil and wood, but in spirit. The roots of these trees had intertwined with the roots of our lives, binding us together in ways both fragile and unbreakable. And as I closed my eyes, I heard the faint, sweet song of falling apricots, a melody of grief transformed and hope reborn. But even as peace settled over us, I knew the journey was far from over. The seasons would turn, and with them, new challenges would come. Yet, with these roots binding us, I felt ready to face whatever future awaited, carrying forward the legacy of resilience and love that these trees and this village embodied. The orchard whispered its promise we would endure together, and so we would. The village had settled into a rhythm that was neither hurried nor stagnant, but rather a delicate balance between remembrance and renewal. Each morning, as the sun stretched its pale fingers over the horizon, I found myself drawn outside before the day's work began. The apricot orchard, once a fragile promise of hope, had grown into a living testament of perseverance. The branches, heavy with blooms and blushes of soft pink and white, swayed gently in the spring breeze, their petals falling like whispered prayers on the earth beneath. I often sat beneath one of the larger trees, its gnarled limbs a familiar embrace, and let the quiet wash over me. The hum of village life stirred softly in the distance, the faint clatter of wooden carts, the distant laughter of children playing, the rhythmic tapping of Yuki's hammer shaping planks for a new home. Each sound was a thread woven into the tapestry of healing. Taro was often nearby, perched on the low stone wall that bordered the orchard. His sketchbook was never far from his hands, and I watched him with a quiet pride as he captured the orchard's essence in delicate pencil strokes. His eyes, once shadowed by survivor's guilt, now gleamed with a subtle peace. I saw in his drawings not just the trees, but the light and shadow of memory itself, how the past and present intertwined with the world around us. Sometimes he would glance up and offer me a shy smile before returning his focus to the page. Kiko had changed as well, though her transformation was more gradual, like the slow unfolding of a tight bud. I saw her one afternoon helping grandmother Sato weave flower garlands from fresh blossoms gathered at the orchard's edge. Their hands worked side by side, fingers nimble and careful, as stories from the village's past flowed between them in soft, shared laughter. The defiant spark in Kiko's eyes had softened, replaced by a quiet strength born from acceptance. It was a subtle but profound shift, one that mirrored the delicate balance of life and loss we all carried. Grandmother Sato's presence remained a steady anchor for us all. Her stories of the apricot trees and ancestors wove a sense of continuity through the community, reminding us that we were part of an unbroken chain of resilience. Her silver hair caught the sunlight as she sat among the children, her warm eyes conveying both wisdom and gentle humor. She spoke often of impermanence not as an end, but as a cycle in which all things found their place. Her words settled in our hearts like seeds, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Meika continued her quiet vigilance, tending to those who sought comfort in her herbal remedies. Her presence was a balm for many, including myself, as we navigated the unpredictable tides of grief. Yuki's practical hands had rebuilt much of what the landslide had taken, his craftsmanship visible in every sturdy beam and carefully placed support in the orchard. Together, they embodied the spirit of collaboration and hope that had taken root alongside the trees. In the evenings, the village gathered beneath the orchard's blossoming canopy. Lanterns flickered softly, casting a warm glow that danced on the petals and faces alike. I led the children and neighbors in a remembrance ritual, a quiet honoring of those we had lost and the lives we continued to nurture. The scent of apricot blossoms mingled with the earth's cool breath, creating a sacred space where grief and gratitude coexisted. The children's voices, once hesitant and broken, now rose in gentle song, a melody of healing that carried through the night. As I looked around at the faces illuminated by lantern light, the tentative smiles, the steady gazes, the gentle touches, I felt the weight of our shared journey. The scars left by the landslide would never fully fade, but they no longer defined us. Instead, they had become the roots from which new life grew, nourished by memory, love, and the quiet resilience of a community bound by loss and hope. I pressed my hand against the rough bark of the apricot tree above me, feeling the pulse of life beneath the surface. In this moment, surrounded by the gentle hum of renewal, I understood that grief was not a chain to bind us, but a river to guide us toward acceptance. The village, once shattered, now stood quietly resilient, carrying forward the legacy of those who had gone before, their memory alive in every falling apricot and every breath of spring air. And as the petals drifted down around us like a soft, ephemeral snowfall, I whispered a promise to nurture this fragile beauty, this song of impermanence, until it blossomed into something enduring and whole. The soft rustle of apricot petals filled the air like a whispered song, a delicate cascade of pink and white that fluttered down through the dappled sunlight. I stood beneath the blossoming trees, the branches heavy with flowers that seemed to glow with an inner light. The scent was sweet and faint, a gentle fragrance that mingled with the earthiness of spring rain still lingering in the soil. Around me, the children played quietly, their laughter a tender melody woven into the stillness. For a long moment, I simply breathed in the scene, letting the fragile beauty of the apricot orchard settle deep inside me. This was the place where sorrow had once rooted itself so firmly, where the landslide had torn through our lives with merciless force. And yet, here we were alive, growing fragile but unyielding. The trees, just as the village, had endured storms, loss, and fear. Now their blossoms were a living testament to the truth I had come to understand, that life was a cycle of falling and rising, loss and rebirth. Impermanence was not an enemy but a teacher. Taro sat nearby, his slender fingers carefully turning the pages of his sketchbook. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, traced the falling petals as if trying to capture their fleeting flight with graphite and ink. I watched him for a moment, how far he had come from the withdrawn boy, who once hid behind silence and shadow. His art had become his voice, a gentle bridge between memory and hope. Kiko stood apart from the others, her usual defiance softened into something almost reverent. She reached out a hand, letting a single petal rest on her palm before it drifted away in the breeze. I caught the flicker of vulnerability in her sharp eyes, the quiet acceptance that had taken root after months of resistance. It was a fragile thing, this piece, but no less precious for its delicacy. Grandmother Sato's voice rose softly from a shaded corner of the orchard, where she sat on a weathered bench surrounded by the younger children, including little Sora, whose wide eyes drank in every word. She told us stories of the apricot trees, tales passed down through generations of how their blossoms symbolized the fleeting nature of life, the beauty found in moments that could never be held forever. Her stories wove the past into the present, binding us to the roots of the village and the ancestors who had loved this land long before tragedy had struck. I stepped closer to the bench, my fingers brushing the rough wood as I listened. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows and painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath in this quiet hour, suspended between day and night, between what had been and what was yet to come. Hana, Mika's gentle voice broke through my reverie. She approached, carrying a small basket of herbs and flowers she had gathered from the forest's edge. Her eyes, warm and kind, met mine with unspoken understanding. They bloomed beautifully this year. I nodded, a quiet smile touching my lips. Yes. Like a song, soft, fleeting, but unforgettable. Yuki appeared then, his broad frame moving steadily through the orchard. He carried a handmade wooden frame, built to support the younger saplings through the coming summer winds. His presence was a reminder of how much the village had rebuilt not just homes and roads, but the very fabric of our lives. Together, we stood beneath the apricot trees, surrounded by children who had found new families in one another. The orchard was alive with gentle movement, the flutter of petals, the whisper of leaves, the soft murmur of voices sharing stories, laughter and tears. I thought of the long months that had passed since the landslide, the storms we had weathered, the nights filled with fear and exhaustion. Each moment had been a thread in the tapestry. We were weaving a tapestry of grief and healing, impermanence and hope. As the petals fell like a tender rain, I felt a profound peace settle within me. This was the song of falling apricots, a melody of endings and beginnings that played softly in the heart of the village. It was a reminder that even in loss, there was beauty. Even in impermanence, a promise of renewal. I closed my eyes and let the petals brush my face, their cool touch grounding me in the present. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but here, beneath these blooming branches, I found courage to face it with open hands and a hopeful heart. "Come, children," I called softly, my voice steady and warm. "Let us honor those we carry in our hearts and celebrate the life we nurture together." One by one, they gathered around me. Taro held his sketchbook close, Kiko's sharp eyes now softened with a quiet light, and little Sora reached out eagerly to catch a falling petal. Grandmother Sato began an ancient song, her voice steady and sure, weaving a thread of continuity through the orchard's gentle hush. The village, once broken and silent, now breathed as one beneath the apricot trees. We were bound by roots deeper than soil and stone, roots of memory, love, and the unyielding hope that even the most delicate blossom would fall only to give way to new life. And so the song of falling apricots carried on, a timeless melody that would echo through seasons yet to come, reminding us all that in impermanence, there is grace, and in every ending, a new beginning waits to bloom. The petals swirled around me like a soft, fragrant rain, and I whispered a silent promise to hold the past gently, to nurture the present tenderly, and to walk forward with the quiet strength of the apricot trees. As twilight deepened and the first stars began to shimmer, a sense of stillness settled over the orchard. Yet beneath that stillness, life pulsed quietly, steadily, a living testament to the enduring power of love, memory, and the fragile beauty of impermanence. And in that moment, I knew we were truly home.